just about ready to go. So I want to start by thanking you all for caring about your city and your community enough to come out to an event like this. This is not an official city-sponsored event. This was put together by a group of, this is a grassroots effort put together by citizens here in Spokane. That includes Jacob Grady, Laria, Nicolette Ochiltree, and am I missing someone? Yes. And Hallie, yes, thank you. So we'll get started in just a second. We're going to have some speakers come up and share some information. Again, my name is Shane. I'm the current affairs specialist here at the library. As we typically do, I'm going to go ahead and read our land acknowledgement. I am on the traditional homelands of the 4 bands of the Spokane Tribe of Indians: Upper Band, Middle Band, Lower Band, Chewelah Band. Since time immemorial, the Spokane Tribe of Indians has lived and cared for these grounds, identifying themselves as flesh of the earth. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. We show gratitude to the land, river, and peoples who have been fishing, hunting, harvesting, and gathering here for generations. May we learn from one another's stories so that we may nurture the relationship of the people of the Spokane Tribe and to all those who share this land. If you don't have a note card and you want to ask a question, raise your hand and someone will try to get you one. There's going to be some buckets going around a little later to collect your questions. And you may find later on in the event not only that you have a question, but you might actually be able to provide an answer, because we have people here from various stakeholder groups. We've invited people here from the business community, from the service provider community, from the outreach community, and the neighborhoods, and probably several others. So with that, I'm going to invite our first speakers, Gavin and Ben, if they are here. Yeah, they're coming up.
I'm just here for moral support for Gavin. Do we have the video? Gavin, this is the only thing we get off by making a previous video, and then that takes up part of the time.
That's how that works.
And then I can keep referring to the video.
This video makes me
There we
jump
go.
around just a little bit.
We're going to show this 4 minutes long, not too long.
It is now possible to have the individual styling every family wants in its home. In these lovely and spacious homes, beauty of design and functional practicability have been expertly combined to bring home buyers livability plus. The choice of a variety.
The American Dream. Is it really attainable for all Americans today? We call this series Housing and Help because the opportunity to have housing for every citizen is becoming harder and harder to come by. That reality is also causing big collateral problems for every corner of society, from business to nonprofit providers, government, neighborhood safety, and especially those experiencing homelessness. If our travels to Houston taught us one thing, it's that it will take every part of our community working together to solve a crisis that is tearing at the fabric of what it means to live and prosper in our Spokane region. Our last episode took us back to 2012 and showed a time when Houston, like Spokane today, was experiencing the highest rates of homelessness in their history. Today, Houston has the lowest homelessness rate of any major city in America, and the people who helped turn things around for the 4th largest city in the country have more to tell us about how Spokane and the rest of America can flip the script too. So what if Spokane did act now, as a region, to coordinate our efforts like Houston did? What would that look like? As we said from the beginning of this series, if there's one thing that ties business, government, nonprofit service providers, and all of us as citizens together, it's that we in Spokane, just like most cities in America, are spending 5 times more as a community by doing nothing about the problem of homelessness than if we pooled our resources into one coordinated plan. So if money is being spent every day and having little impact, where are the dollars going? There are at least 6 major sources of money that currently provide assistance to the homeless in our region. There's a variety of federal funding sources, which distributes funds to our community. The state of Washington also provides financial assistance. The largest provider of those funds is the Department of Commerce. The cities in our region also provide support dollars, including the City of Spokane and Spokane Valley, as does Spokane County. Many businesses, big and small, also provide money directly to a wide variety of agencies and nonprofit service providers, like Volunteers of America, Hope House, the Salvation Army, Habitat for Humanity, Catholic Charities, Family Promise, YWCA, Union Gospel Mission, and many more. The vast majority of these dollars are currently not coordinated. The same can be said for philanthropic organizations. Although some of the larger charitable foundations do occasionally pool their dollars, most often they are giving to specific service providers whose mission they support. All of this is incredibly well-intentioned and has been for decades, each group trying in a big way to solve the immediate crisis in front of them. As well-meaning as they are clearly not coordinating in the way Houston is, where one central organization, the Coalition for the Homeless, helps direct money and resources from each of these funding sources and strategically aligns them with the experts who are managing the homelessness crisis every day to get housing and help to those who need it most in the most efficient and effective way possible. There will always be pushback and resistance to what lies ahead. But what if we could set aside our differences and work together?
There's really only one choice. All of us, from government to nonprofit agencies to business and philanthropy, to form one centrally focused and regionally coordinated plan. Or we don't. We either commit to reducing homelessness and getting people off the streets and into housing and help, or not. It's up to all of us to get under one tent and work together.
That's on. Let's hope everything I say doesn't repeat a second time. So my name is Ben Stuckert. I'm the head of the Low Income Housing Consortium. I've been there for about 3 years. Before that, I was at the City of Spokane. And when I got to the Housing Consortium, and at the city, it's a pretty contentious issue, homelessness. And it seems like there's all sorts of people divided with different opinions. And so I went and had an idea for a video series, and if you want to go there, it's housingandhelp.org. It's 5 episodes. It's about 2 hours total, all 5 episodes. It's worth watching to dig in on Houston. It digs in on Camp Hope. It digs in on some causalities in episode 1 that I think does a good job of laying the groundwork for it. But while we were making that, we were in about making episode 1, and Frank Swoboda deserves all the credit in the world for the quality. I believe it just won a gold Addy locally and a silver, and it's going to nationals. And so that's all about Frank and Laria from Smith Barbieri and Gavin's excellent, which now has turned into a full-time job for him. Thank you, Gavin. But while we were making it, we were trying to figure out how to frame it other than just trying to humanize homelessness, and I came across an interview with a stakeholder group of businesses in Spokane that were interviewing Mark Eichenbaum from Houston, and Mark was just talking numbers and a 60% plus decrease in Houston. So as part of our video series, we flew down and spent 4 days in Houston, and really you gotta regionally form a regional organization, and the function of that is systemic, but it's really so you can come up with a plan, because things aren't coordinated now. They're not. If we thought a $13 million shelter was in any plan that anybody's written about homelessness in the last 5 years, we're delusional. It's just not there. That's 350 people in a warehouse is not in anybody that's done research's solutions. But you try to stop the bleeding when you don't have a central plan. And you do what's in immediate need, but then you don't have a way to pay for it, and that's unfortunate. But if you have a central plan to go for. So I think the series does a really good job. Gavin has taken this and run with it. So I'm gonna let him take it from here. That's the background of how it came about. And Gavin, as the narrator, and having great relations and a lot of no time now on his hands, has really done a great job of moving this forward. to this conversation. And with that, I'll step back and let Gavin take it from there.
Thank you, Ben. It's been a real pleasure. Yeah, doing the housing and help was a lot of fun. I mean, I learned a lot of things along the way. I learned how to walk in slow motion like that. It's kind of painful to watch, but it's a remarkable. Once we got down to Houston, as Ben said, I began to see a world that I could understand, having spent 18 years as a CFO of the city. And so that was a world down there we had a 3-term mayor in East Parker and other policy people talking about things that we understand here in Spokane. I'll get it even closer. There we go. So that process really brought us to, coming back from Houston saying, okay, we've done this video series and we continue to do work there, but can we engage the community in a really meaningful way? And it's really fascinating to watch this thing grow, because one of the things that has become really, really apparent is this is very much a bipartisan issue. People have their orientation in this issue, but I don't meet anybody that doesn't have a compassionate view of homelessness. I haven't met that person yet. And I haven't met a person with, that may have that focus of compassion that doesn't understand the importance of commerce in our community, the importance of our downtown, of maintaining those places for the purposes, that they're intended for. And so it's a both-and conversation every step of the way. It's not an either-or kind of conversation, and it makes it a really energizing problem to work on. So one of the manifestations of that is when we went to the jurisdictions to begin to have this conversation and say, hey, Spokane County and City of Spokane, Spokane Valley, could we have this conversation about what a regional, collaborative, break down the silos kind of authority looks like, and approach this much differently, where we have that centralized strategic plan, where we centralize resources. Can we have that conversation? And what we found was 19 of 20 electeds signed off on a very detailed joint statement supporting this process last month. I can't remember the last time that happened. And we're going to have on April 24th, I believe, and we'll get that posted, a public event where all the electeds come together and host a meeting just like this with the community. And I don't think that's ever happened, where all the electeds sat down with the community from those 3 jurisdictions. And so it really speaks to the power of this topic and how important it is to all of us, but it also points to the ability of everybody to work together. We're getting, in working on this, we're getting support from the business community in a big way. We're getting support from philanthropic organizations. We're getting it from every angle. And there's really no us and them in this conversation whatsoever. And so an event like this that's grassroots, isn't organized by us, isn't organized by any of the jurisdictions, it's a community event, but we are tracking it on our website, which is SpokaneUnite.org. And there you'll find a calendar that shows all the events that are going on in the community, not just our events, but events like this. And it'll also keep track of all the community input. So right here we have Eric filming this for Channel 5, and we'll have it also posted on the website. All of that information, and there'll be questionnaires later in this program, there'll be later surveys also done. All that'll be gathered on that Spokane Unite website, and it'll become the backdrop for our electeds making really important decisions about how we move forward with a different approach to the homelessness response system in our region. There's a lot of meetings every week, and more of those will get posted, and you'll be invited to all of them. And so it's a fun process to watch. I wanted to just spend a moment, this is up on our website also, but this is just one of those, being a CFO type, this is the kind of graphic that I really like. But it describes the why. Why are we doing this? Why are we approaching it this way? And it talks about a regional collaborative approach. It talks about homelessness being a long-term community challenge. We're recognizing this isn't a problem we have this year or for the next 5 years. I think we're seeing this is something we're going to be dealing with for a long, long time. And there's a lot of underlying things going on in our economy and in our country that indicate that's absolutely the case. It talks about integrated resources and strategies. You know, when you bring together your strategies and your resources and everybody's working together, we saw this in my entire time at the city. Never once, when everybody's talking and working together, has any problem gone wanting for resources. Resources have never been the problem. The biggest problem is always the ability to talk and work and collaborate together. And there's a lot of reasons for that, you know, but if you can get everybody talking and working together, we can do amazing things. You've seen it like even cleaning up the Spokane River and things like that. Things we thought we couldn't do, things we thought we couldn't afford. And in fact, we certainly did them and could afford them. It talks about traditional local government structure. Cities spin off activities all the time that they're not ideally designed to work with. So we've spun off transit, we've spun off animal control, we've spun off the facilities district, we've spun off all kinds of activities that cities are not designed to deliver. Cities and counties are not designed to deliver social services. You know, despite really heroic and best efforts, and there's a recognition more and more that they're just not built for this challenge. So we're going to take it out of that and have a single purpose organization. And then finally, depoliticize. And when I say depoliticize, I mean kind of the politics that we all see on the talking heads. But what I mean is we need the politics. We need the city and the county and the valley. We need them to be helping us with zoning, with land use planning, with resources, with all kinds of things. But we don't need the political decision-making process. That's the thing that it's not designed to do. So very quickly, the what, we're going to talk about legal structure, what the initial funding, the initial staffing, the governance, and we're well into that. We have a variety of committees working on that. Subject matter experts are presenting that information to the jurisdictions and the elected so they can make decisions on that. And then over here, we have the stakeholder input process. That's us. That's looking at this 3 circles primarily: health services, housing, and public safety, and where they intersect on the homelessness response system. So we're gathering as much information as we can in those 3 circles to help inform what this system will look like. So as was said earlier by Shane, we're talking to the providers. We've had meetings today with Sheriff Knowles. We've had meetings with Police Chief Meidel and others. We'll continue to do that. The housing, as you know, is central to this problem. So we've got all kinds of ad hoc committees working towards that and what the solutions might look like. And then health and services is huge. And that, bringing all those worlds together is going to be a lot of work. And we'll see that evolving through what we have right now. And I should have mentioned, we're in a 90-day due diligence period right now. When they signed that joint statement a month ago, March 15th, we entered into a 90-day due diligence period. We're 30 days into it. We have 60 days left. We received some advice. Do this quick. Don't do this over 5 years the way Seattle did. Don't do this. You can really drag it out. But 90 days is really short. And so we're just going to keep cranking along at the best pace we possibly can. Ultimately, we need to figure out how to measure success. What does that look like? And that, again, you'll see in the survey later on. This helps ask a lot of questions. How do you measure success? Because there's so many different aspects. These aren't widgets. It's a very human issue with an infinite array of complexity that you have to somehow find a way to measure success to make sure the outcomes you're getting, that you have a successful regional integrated entity delivering what all of us expect. So that's where we're at in the process. So really appreciate you being here tonight, and we're just here very much to listen and learn, and we'll be posting this up and feeding this back to the electeds, like I said. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a lot of really great information. In just a second, Nicolette Ochiltree is going to come. She designed the survey, and so she's going to speak to that a little bit more. Just as a reminder, if you have a card and you have a question that you want answered or a comment, you can raise your hand and somebody will come with a bucket to you. And if you don't have a card, also raise your hand and someone will give you a card.
All right, hello. Ooh, hot mic. Hi, I'm Nicolette Ochiltree,
and I am the Spokane City Council Manager of Housing and Homelessness. Some of you may remember me from before I worked for the city, when I was just the resident, yell at City Council on Monday nights girl. And anyway, so I'm really excited to show you guys some of these survey results live. We're keeping the survey open at least till the 20th, maybe longer. As you can see, we have 115 responses, which is pretty awesome, especially since we just started to send it out late yesterday. And can you scroll back down a little bit, Mark? What I want to show you, up, sorry. What I want to show you before we get into the nitty gritty is, can you click responses? So 115 people, average time to complete. All of this will be made publicly available online so you can see every little bit of the detail on all of the answers of the survey. So if you could scroll up a little bit, or down, just make it go this way. Okay, so we started out with some different stakeholder groups, made a little bit of description between them, asked people to identify which stakeholder group that they most identify with. And then among those, we've got people experiencing homelessness, citizens in neighborhoods, service providers, governments and elected officials, businesses, faith-based organizations, advocacy and activists. And then we ask people, who are we missing, right? And again, all of those more detailed results we'll be able to put online. But we're gonna kind of go through this quickly because we want to get to the Q&A part of this. And okay, so one thing I really think is awesome here is that I was a little bit worried we might have categories where nobody had answered at all. But people experiencing homelessness, 5 people already responded. And it looks like service providers were the largest group represented so far. And you'll see, look, now it's at 116, it just keeps updating. At the end of the survey, we'll be able to post all this online and you'll be able to see all that. So then we asked people to rank, and this is the business stakeholder section, to rank some of their concerns. And then as Mark's hovering over, you can see the way that they're ranked here is safety and security, impact on businesses, employee well-being, costs, public perception, liability. And each stakeholder group were asked slightly different questions, and those questions were essentially made through some research, through asking various members of those stakeholder groups what kinds of questions, concerns, priorities they had. And after each one, it's always what concerns are missing, because we're not going to say that we know, all of the concerns you have, or all of the priorities that you have set. So always is what's missing. And so if you could just keep going, we're going to get through this part quickly so we can get to all the questions. And can you keep scrolling? Scroll. So in this section, there were 5 different ways that you can respond to all of these different priorities. And then the ones over here that are red are the ones that they think are top priority. The ones that are in the blue range are the ones that think are less of a priority. And as we get more and more people responding to the survey, we'll see more sort of nuanced responses and have better data on all of that. And so I do encourage you guys all to share out the survey or take it. If you haven't already taken it, you can take it right now or later, and you can go through it. And then so each of these two, when you get all the survey results, you'll be able to see all the individual questions that different stakeholder groups, not just your own, were asked and their responses to all of those. And then you'll be able to hover over and see all the percentages of all that stuff. And I think that in many ways, this is one survey just to inform future surveys and future stakeholder engagement and breakout work groups. And so again, not every question was asked, because in some way, we're also, with what we're doing tonight, making sure that we know the questions that you want answered over the next 90-day due diligence period. So I think because we'll be able to make this online, we don't need to go through a lot of the nitty-gritty of the answers. I just wanted to let you know this is what it's going to look like, and you'll be able to access it all. But I kind of want to get to the Q&A section of it pretty soon. So if you still have a question, write it down on the note card. If you don't have a note card and you need one, raise your hand and they'll walk around with note cards. And then they have little buckets that you can enter them in. And we're going to do something slightly different too, which is if there's a question that we can't answer, we might call on somebody from the community to see if they can answer it, because we're not the experts, right? And so and that'll be interesting. We'll see how that goes. But the other part is I really want to do a sort of call to action tonight with you guys tonight, because this community conversation, there's a great turnout. There are a lot of faces I know, there are a lot of faces I don't know. There are a lot of people in very diverse. I see like business owners, service providers, I see a human rights commissioner or two. I see people from all walks of life, and that's really exciting. But I want to encourage you to create a community conversation of your own with a stakeholder group that you identify with, or a mix of a stakeholder group that you want to identify with and one that you don't. And have them like, Tupperware parties, but civically minded. I think that it's a really great idea for you guys to have those conversations with the folks where you're at your board meetings, at your commission meetings. It can be formal or informal, it can be small, it can be large. And then to send that feedback back to the SpokaneUnite.org website. There's a section where you can give feedback back, and you can even fill out a little form if you want to do an event, and then you might be able to get an update, like somebody from like Gavin or somebody else from his team to give you an update on the 90-day due diligence process. But we'd be fools to think this is the only community conversation we should have on such an important issue, and also fools to think that we know your stakeholder group better than you do. And so we want to make sure that you guys are engaging with the folks that need to have their input be made known, and then we'll make it publicly available online for both accountability and transparency purposes. That's kind of the idea going forward. So as we're getting ready to move into the Q&A, I'm going to try to have a little fun here. So you don't have to participate if you don't want to, but it's a little raise your hand if section of this. So raise your hand if you were born in Spokane. I was. There's a lot of, yeah, okay. Raise your hand if you've ever burnt your mouth on hot pizza. Okay. Raise your hand if you like pineapple on your pizza. Okay. This is a controversial one. I'm actually surprised that many people raise their hands for that. That's pretty good. Raise your hand if nothing bad has ever happened in your life. Oh my God, okay, nobody's perfect in here, we're all human. Good. I was actually worried somebody was gonna raise their hand and then I'd have to have a whole new series of anxieties on that one. Raise your hand if you think we have a problem with homelessness in Spokane. So that's something that we all agree on. Raise your hand if you want to help make our homeless response system more effective. That's awesome, because we do need help to make it more effective. Raise your hand if you're willing to have tough conversations in a civil manner. That's a hard one. And even if you want to, sometimes it's hard to be good at that. So I'm glad that you guys are here today, and hopefully we kind of carry that through when we do the Q&A so that nobody gets out of hand. I didn't see any pitchforks here, so I think most people left them at the door, I hope. So yeah, I think we're gonna get into this Q&A. Like I said, there are a couple different ways you could ask questions. I'm gonna start with one that we got online. And I don't know that, is Rick Clark here in person? I don't think he is. I think he just submitted it online. Let's start with his real quick, because I think that he hits on a theme, I think it's a common theme, and it's a necessary theme for what we're going to be doing going forward. He says, no, I'm at home. Okay, so he's at home. All right, so Rick Clark sent an email to, and I don't know if you guys want to pull up the graphic with the survey QR code and the number to text if you have questions and the email address. All right, so this one's from Rick. He says, we all know that Spokane is willing and often able to throw money at things like shelters, programs, etc. We can create programs, and we can even try to change laws. But until we can connect people with the world going on around them, we will continue to start over every year in Spokane. Connection comes in many forms, obviously. As a man who spent time here in Spokane homeless, and whose life was literally saved by connection, what are your thoughts on connection and its importance to the overall issue of homelessness? And for those of you who don't know Rick Clark, he is the head of Giving Backpacks and Spokane Quarantine, and he has a fantastic TED Talk, TEDx Talk Spokane. Rick Clark, you should Google it and you should watch it, because his story and his connection is really beautiful. And I'm gonna take this one personally real quick and just say that connection is one of the main things we need to do here. It astonishes me that people can be working in the same industry for decades and not know each other and not talk to each other. And I think part of that problem is built by the way that we operate our funding streams. You know, when we have service providers fighting each other for the same sources of money and pitting them against each other, there's not a lot of incentive for them to work together and, share tricks of the trade and all of that. And so that's one way. But the other thing that hits me about what Rick said is, I personally experienced homelessness here in Spokane a little over 26 years ago. And had I had some connections and family in the right kinds of spaces, and if they had the right kind of resources, then maybe I wouldn't have been split up from my family. Maybe I wouldn't have gone through that. Maybe I wouldn't have had to have moved to Texas to live with my grandparents, you know? And nowadays, when I see the kinds of connections that are starting to be built through this uncomfortable conversation about what a regional authority looks like, I'm watching people that I didn't even know they didn't know each other. They're doing the same work or similar work or overlapping work like puzzle pieces, and they just haven't been able to, or nobody said, hey, do you know this person? You should know this person. And from all different areas, from businesses, from service providers, people experiencing homelessness, and we have some in the audience tonight. And so I think I would just encourage you guys to have these uncomfortable conversations. They'll get less uncomfortable the more you have them, and the more civilly you engage with one another. And yeah, so that's kind of my response to this. So we're gonna go with another, can you guys walk around your buckets too a little bit? I did grab a couple from the bucket, so we can just kind of go through a couple of these, and then we'll see who wants to answer them.
We have some more for you.
Okay. Okay, so this is just the first one that's right on the top of the pile, so we'll just start this. This one says, can the business community help pay for solutions, or is it just the government's job? So I think that, I wonder if we have somebody from the business community here who might want to like field that question and maybe even tell us about a time where the business community has helped partner with either a service provider organization. Here, Kitty. Do you want to come up here or?
Good evening. My name is Katie Brie. So luckily, I represent local business here downtown, Washington Trust Bank. Is that why I'm echoing? Oh, okay. We formed a coalition of private businesses called Hello for Good. You can learn more about us at helloforgood.org. And basically, the business community saw what was happening, especially downtown, but within our entire region, and said, we need to get involved in this and do something to help make a difference. Business is really committed to this issue because we have employees, we have customers, we have vendors, we have people coming into our businesses every day, employed by our businesses every day that are impacted by I'll call it the intersection of homelessness, some mental health issues, behavioral health, addiction issues, etc. So a lot of people ask that question, oh, capitalists, you're full of money, why don't you just put money towards this? I think that's not necessarily the number one solution. I think it takes a lot of different players coming into the same room at the same time to discuss what that looks like. Spending money per se isn't just the right solution, it's spending money in the right way. Businesses do spend money towards this issue through taxes, just like citizens do. Businesses are willing to support philanthropic causes, just like individuals and consumers are. So I can tell you in Spokane specifically, businesses are committed to coming forward and coming together for a really good solution on this. We fully support what Gavin, Rick, and Teresa and others are doing to convene people, get them in the right room at the same time and have conversations about this. We want to fund the things that are going to work. We want to fund solutions. We want to support solutions in partnership along with everyone else who's out there. I can tell you, however, that we are paying in ways that aren't necessarily positive through adverse impacts and negative impacts that have happened to us. So it's not like business is sitting here completely untouched and invincible and not feeling the impacts of this. I guarantee you we're hearing stories every single day about businesses being impacted. I can also tell you that businesses aren't sitting in ivory towers with tons of money living in big mansions. A lot of small businesses have been impacted. So it's not necessarily fair to call on them to ask them to step up in the sense when they've been adversely impacted. What we're trying to do as a relatively large employer in town is partner with other employers and say, how can we all coalesce and come together and join the rest of you and others that have the expertise and the knowledge and the passion, the commitment to address this and figure out a solution. Don't know if that answered your question, but that's my thought.
Thank you. And so I do want to kind of keep this like a conversation, so I'm going to try this a little bit differently. But I'm wondering if somebody from the service provider community wanted to kind of respond and also maybe give examples of ways that they could see businesses partner with them to make their impact on our community and to mitigate the efforts or mitigate, you know, the impacts of homelessness on the community in a more collaborative way. Julie, would you want to? respond at all? You don't have to. I don't have to put you on the spot. We can have volunteers. I just don't see anybody else raising their hand.
I think that it is completely a community-wide effort, from business to nonprofits to government. The solutions that we all create together impact the entire community. And I think one of the biggest things that business can do to help is to change the narrative in homelessness. We as a community have to start there. How we speak about people is how we treat people.
All right. So another question here says, we were a newly formed nonprofit group planning to bring affordable housing in North Spokane. Will this regional approach include North Spokane? So I'm gonna take this one because it's the easy one to answer, which is yes. It's going to include all of Spokane, Spokane County, the Valley, and hopefully we can actually get folks from other local jurisdictions to join, because this is a regional problem, and so we hope to address it in a regional and collaborative way. And more cities have the opportunity to sign on, and hopefully that's a wake-up call to some of them to jump on board and help out. Okay, so I'm going to go on to another question. And actually, Ben, are you still here? I should make you answer this. You're hiding. So this one says, how did Houston and how can we, Spokane, measure progress when addressing homelessness? And if Daniel Ramos is here too, he might be able to, he had some really good feedback on that question last night.
Well, I feel like Houston was attractive to me because in 10 years they decreased homelessness by 64%. It seems like your baseline metric. And then they're looking at, Houston has a really good move-on strategy. So they built, over 10 years, they built 8,800 units of permanent supportive housing. But they housed 25,000 people. And that's because 80% of people, they're able to attract 80% of people that went in, over the last 10 years, that went into permanent supportive housing, stabilized, and went into market rate housing using rapid rehousing dollars. And so if you look at the continuum, you don't want what's happened sometimes in Spokane in our permanent supportive housing units is 80% of the people that were there at the beginning are still there 5 to 10 years later. And so you need a strategy to stabilize people. And part of that is putting enough services in that housing. But those are the type of metrics I think you need to look at.
Thank you. All right, so some of you guys got spicy with these questions, I'm just gonna say. And just in the spirit of transparency, we are gonna scan all of these and then put these online. It doesn't look like anybody put their name on it anyway, so they will be anonymous, but I want you guys to be able to see every single question that was asked tonight. I know when I've gone to these kinds of events before and I see this card method, I'm like, well, are they really gonna just answer the easy ones? But you guys will be able to see every single one of these, and I'm hoping we can get different folks from the community to respond to each and every one of these. So again, you'll be able to visit SpokaneUnite.org for many of these. Another one on wine. It says, what things did not work well with the Houston model? Did the leaders in Texas provide any pitfalls to avoid beyond telling us to act quickly? Gavin, do you want to cover this, or?
I think Houston has a lot of the problems we're going to have. They've got a not in my backyard big problem, just like every city does. And so how they're working to get past that. They've got some advantages we don't have. Their cost of housing, especially during the 65% reduction period the last 10 years, was much, much less than the city of Spokane. They also don't have zoning the way we do. And so they had a lot of really hidden advantages in delivering the pretty remarkable results that they have. I think we have a lot of advantages. And I think for a lot of reasons that, right now everybody's talking about Houston, Atlanta, and a couple of other places that have done a remarkable job. I think maybe in 10 years, people will be sending people to Spokane to say, how did we do what we did? And, our ability to come together as a community, this kind of meeting is representative of that. when I heard Katie talking just now, we wouldn't be accomplishing what we're doing now, even this far, without the support of Hello for Good and other business organizations. And they're definitely, everybody's coming together on this one in ways that I think, you know, the fourth largest metropolitan area in the country, Houston, really can't do the way we can do it, the size that we're at. We're kind of a Goldilocks size, I think, in many ways for tackling a problem like this. I think we have to believe we can do it, and I think there's a lot of that here tonight. You want me to skip to other questions that I have in my hand, or do you want to?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Who has been selected early to run this regional body? Nobody. There's none of that going on right now. This is information gathering and really going through and having a very collaborative process, and none of that kind of conversation. I mean, we can begin to imagine the kind of person that would run it, the CEO that would run it would have the kind of skills that you would expect, that could unite a community, a disparate community with a lot of different stakeholder interests, you know, whether it's business or philanthropic or citizens, neighborhood groups, providers, people experiencing homelessness. I mean, it goes on and on. Who's the kind of person that can unite that? Who's the kind of person that has the executive skills? I've never seen, you know, there was, in my time at the city, we graphed out the whole criminal justice system. And it went layer after layer after layer. You've got the police and the sheriff's office, and you've got the court systems, which are complex unto themselves. You've got the public defender, the prosecutors, the probation, and the jails. And it goes on and on and on. And about the third layer down, everybody's eyes just cross. And I only just mention that because for the first time I saw something that made the criminal justice system look simple. And that is the homelessness response system. I mean, you've got to take your hat off to the people that have been doing all the work in this area, because it's the most incredibly complex system I've ever seen. So you're going to have a leader that can grapple with that also. And the person we saw down in Houston, Mike, and what's his last name? Anyway, Mike somebody that runs the Coalition for Homelessness was with Cisco Foods, and he was a senior guy there. It's a $100 billion company, and he didn't know a whole lot about homelessness response. He knew how to block and tackle and enable the whole system to succeed. He's one of the best listeners I've ever seen, and he would hand off to the subject matter experts that worked for him and kind of orchestrate those kind of skill sets. But we haven't even begun to have that conversation at this point. Here's another one. 110% support a more collaborative and coordinated system. However, given the division, infighting, politicalization of homelessness in Spokane, who do we find to serve and lead a coordinated system who providers, government will follow and work with? What are the skills and attributes of the person who we need? Have you already somebody in mind? Actually, that's the same question. Sorry to put you through that.
Gavin, do you also want to cover a question? Yeah, that is the Houston model sustainable? What's the question?
Well, it started in 2012, and you know, when we looked into the finances of it, it looks extremely sustainable, the way it's structured. And so, you know, we spent quite a bit of time on the finances, and I won't bore you with those now, but they leveraged resources from a broad array of places that we're not leveraging resources. And so, you know, I see nothing, as a finance type, I see nothing but opportunity there. But we can't leverage those resources, federal, state, and local, unless we find a way to all work together on that. And a lot of that is about relationships. I'll just mention that also, because when Katie stands up here and represents the business community and their interests, their partnership, whether it's business or philanthropy, all these are critical. I mean, if we need to go to the state legislature, or we need to go to the federal, you know, level to get changes in laws or regulations or other things to help us accomplish the goals we're going to accomplish, you want to have business right there beside you. You want to have the whole community right there beside you. And of course, that's not the job of the individual service providers in the city, but that is the job of the regional service provider, to have not just managing a homeless response system, but also to have relationships to get the outcomes you're looking for. So that's one of the other things that I think these relationships with business, philanthropy, et cetera, really bring to the system.
That's awesome, thank you. So we have a couple other questions. I was going to bring Hallie up to respond to a question that we got. Hallie, are you good to?
Okay, I'm Hallie from Compassionate Addiction Treatment, and the question that Nicolette handed me is, how will this plan deal with illegal drug use and addiction and enforcing treatment? So I think when asking that question, like that's part of this gathering together, is coming together and figuring out what does that look like. It's not for me to dictate to you what that looks like, but I can share my experience. And my experience is that people experiencing homelessness, I haven't met a single person that says, I really want to spend my time addicted. So there's a lot of underlying core issues. Those of you that know what Maslow's hierarchy is, if you don't have basic stability and safety in your life, a place to sleep, food to eat, just those core basics, you're in a survival mode and your brain is not functioning in survival mode the way that it functions when you're in a healthy and safe location. So this would be addressing housing at its core and then wrapping folks in services. It all naturally leads to recovery from addiction, recovery from trauma, recovery from mental health, recovery from all the many things that are intertwined with homelessness. So I think this is an opportunity for us to get really creative as a community and really look at what it means to do wraparound services and really support people in exiting homelessness.
Thank you for that. And Michael, did you want to go ahead and answer one of the questions that I gave you?
Check, there we go.
Or excuse me, Councilman Cathcart, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Mike Cathcart, good to be here. What can local government, business, nonprofits do to increase housing inventory? Well, sorry. So we're struggling from a supply problem, and we need a lot more supply. But we've actually been doing some really good, important things, I think, that are going to improve just the entire situation for the whole city. Boca is a great example of just this really bold step. Excuse me a second. Just this really bold step that we can take to encourage more housing across the entire city. So that's one that we've done, Building Opportunities and Choices Act for All. That allows for up to 4 units per lot anywhere in the city of Spokane. Secondarily, trying to think what else, ADUs, another big one. So we've made it so much easier to do ADUs anywhere in the city. We've changed the incentives for multifamily tax exemption so that more folks can get access to those and build more units. Trying to think what else. I mean, those are the big things. So trying to address the supply is just one of the most important things that we can do, and we're taking those steps. We're making those bold steps. Anything that allows for more units to get developed. The state is looking at a number of missing middle bills that would also do this across the state, but we've already done it at the local level here in the city of Spokane. So with Boca, we've also addressed some dimensional standard issues to allow for a little bit of an increase in the height, some changes, modifications in the dimensional standards to allow for more townhomes to be developed, which is important because those actually lend themselves to home ownership opportunities as well. And we need a lot more of that. So we need apartments on one end. We need, on the other end, we need units that people can actually own and build equity. So we need that entire ladder in order to address these issues. And so that's the goal, I think, is making it as easy as possible to do good development in the city of Spokane. And we're doing it. We are really doing it. And when we encountered a challenge with like this whole GFC issue that you've probably read about, the majority of council came together and said, yes, look, there's an issue here, we have to address it, and these ginormous fees are not the way to do it because it's going to stifle housing, it's going to stifle the development from occurring. And so we agreed, we need to delay this for a year, we need something more reasonable, we need to take more time to think about this because again, we have this housing crisis in front of us. And it's not something that's going to solve itself, and we have to make ourselves a very palatable place for the housing to get developed. And right now, there's obviously, or there has been in the past, a lot of those obstacles that has resulted in a deficiency in housing. In fact, just this morning, I'll add one last piece here. Just this morning, we got a report that shows that throughout the entire county, we are going to, by 2044, we are going to need 70,000 new homes. 70,000. And when you think about where those are going to go and how they're going to be developed, that is something that we have to plan for and consider with our infrastructure and everything. And so there's a lot of thought that has to go into this. But to accommodate 70,000 homes is going to take a whole lot of innovation and bold policy making to have that occur by 2044. And so I'm glad to be a part of the solution and trying to get more of those housings built in the city of Spokane.
You might.
Go
ahead.
I got it.
Oh, okay.
So how can we help you make Boca permanent, Michael? Because it expires. It was a 1 year, and that's why a lot of people aren't taking advantage of it.
Well, Boca is not going to expire. I will say that from my perspective. We're working on it, and by the end of the year, hopefully there will be a permanent solution in place. Right now, our planners are just putting those kind of provisions there, the final tweaks, getting all the input from the public, making sure that we do it right, but it does take time. And so I would say if you're holding off on something because you think that Boca might go away, don't. Please move forward now, because I will tell you, I don't believe that this council has any plans to remove Boca, and we're just trying to make it better.
ADUs, I'm trying to build one in my backyard, and the architect told me it would be $300,000, and nobody's going to build an ADU in their backyard for $300,000, so there needs to be an off-the-shelf product that lists designs that are affordable, who the contractors could be that could do those, build those designs, and then credit unions or local banks that would create a product for that. I think that would help everybody out a lot, because it's not a lot of people know that you loosened the rules on ADUs, and if we really want it to take off, there's got to be something coming out, and it's got to be the city changed the rules, and it's not going to come from the market, this off-the-shelf product, because that's just not going to spontaneously happen. So somebody needs to create something that somebody like myself that wants to build an ADU can just get it done instead of working $300,000. I can't. It's gonna be stretching it to build a $75,000 ADU.
Yeah, so our planners right now are working on kind of a flip book, if you will, of design options that could be sort of off the shelf, so that you could expedite, not have to have these permit delays or pre-development type meetings. So you'd be able to kind of expedite that process, and hopefully there'll be something that would be more of a modest cost that folks can afford. But we've also tried to talk to, and we're not done, the banks to see if they could create a product specifically for ADUs that would allow more people to develop these in their backyard, because the ability to get access to the funding is obviously a major obstacle for most folks, and they will often use a second mortgage or a home equity line to fund these. And so to provide a broader access to being able to build, whether it's ADUs or like smaller development, we need the banks to be able to offer those products. And so those are conversations that are happening as well. It's a everything has to work synergistically for this all to come together.
Great. So we also have Daniel Ramos here, and he is the CMIS data guru. And I wanted him to address one of the questions I was asked earlier and kind of talk about data a little bit. And the question was, how are we going to measure success with respect to our homeless response system? And go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Nicolette. Daniel Ramos, City of Spokane. My role is really to look at, do the performance management and data collection for all of the projects that are funded through CHHS. And I just want to say, first and foremost, I know we're talking about trying to make things more efficient, process improvement, better management of funds, better collaboration. I want to recognize the people who have been doing this work for years, and you've been doing an excellent job. We see that, I see you. There's always ways to improve, right? But you are doing an excellent job. So I don't want, and Gavin said that, and I'm just echoing that. So in my role over the last, so let me just, why am I even here standing in front of you? My work started in Seattle. I worked at DASC. That's an emergency shelter downtown, premier shelter, hundreds of people, basically looked like a mental health type institution. Worked in information systems there, came over to Spokane for the last 7 years at the city. I've run rapid rehousing projects, emergency shelter, family shelter, transitional housing, and looked at that performance, experienced what it's like to be measured on that. And so what do I do now at CHHS? One of the things I want to do, just for the moment, since I have the mic, just to add to the conversation and educate. There were $40 million that went through the CHHS department last year to support and help those experiencing homelessness. The data shows that they are our neighbors, they are a part of our community. I'm the lead on the point in time count, and we see every year when we ask the question, where did you come from? Overwhelmingly, these are folks that we know. These are the people in our lives. These are the people that I think we all agree early on that we want to support. So on that education piece, let me just share with you how HUD approaches this. They break this problem down into project types. You have emergency shelters, you have transitional housing, which is sort of like an emergency shelter, but you can go up to 2 years. And then you have rapid rehousing projects, which are essentially rental assistance programs. Then you have prevention, which is to stop folks from falling into homelessness. And then you have permanent supportive housing projects. And those are projects where folks who are needing extra assistance can't get into a fair market unit because they need those extra supports, whether it's to work on self-improvement or to help them gain income. Those are those permanent supportive housing units. The question was, how do we measure performance? I will tell you, I'm a HUD trained guy, I'm a Department of Commerce trained guy. So where do we start with that? Well, you start at the project level, where you look at how is a project performing. Is an emergency shelter a rapid rehousing project? Are they getting people and folks into permanent housing? That's great, those providers that have been mentioned here, they do a great job at doing that. Things have evolved since then, and now we're looking at the system level performance, which is, okay, so they exit into permanent housing, but do we see them returning to another shelter, another project, another transitional housing project? So although the outputs at the project level might be great, is the system as a whole improving its performance? That's where we're at now. And what I've really liked hearing was getting to that systems level measurement, which is, we know folks who are experiencing homelessness are cross-utilizers in the homeless system, the education system, criminal justice system, healthcare system. You name a system, they are accessing resources in all of those systems. So if we get to that system level where we can say, hey, here's the top 100 cross-utilizers, and let's get them into housing immediately, we can bring down cost for every system, businesses included, pretty rapidly. But that does take coordination and effort, and I do want to say, I see that at my level, that coordination happening all the time. Again, can it be improved? Yes, but I'm already seeing that collaboration happening. There's collaborators in this room, there's connectors in this room. Nicolette is one of them, others on city council, and in the administration, I see that happening every single day. I was told I have a minute. I can talk forever. Nicolette, anything more?
Okay, I think that's great. I really appreciate that. And I do want to note that how we measure success with respect to our homeless response system might vary from data guru to business owner to service provider. And so, Julie, did you want to talk about a little bit maybe about how you manage success and then answer the question on your card?
I do want to say, Julie, great work, by the way. I do want to just ask a question of the group that's hosting this tonight. So I know that the city brought in $40 million to help support this issue. What did the private business coalitions and other groups, do we know the breakout of what everyone is contributing from different municipalities to just know what the numbers are?
So Gavin might be able to answer that a little bit, but the short answer is we don't know yet. So when we had the very selected officials sign on to this letter, it's to open this 90-day due diligence process. There's an acknowledgement that right now our current system pulls funding from various different sources, from federal, state, local. Hopefully and ideally, by possibly restructuring on this or creating either nonprofit or PDA, that's what they're discussing right now. We'll also be able to get more buy-in from members of the business community and philanthropy, so we can pool all those resources more together. But as for how many funds in the past versus in the future, that remains to be seen, and hopefully will be fleshed out a little bit in the future. But I do want to see if you can answer the how do you measure success with respect to homelessness, and then the question on your card.
How I measure success for homelessness is in the word, homes is how we solve homelessness. So we don't measure sustainable housing as well. So if we are talking about just putting somebody in a home, are they maintaining that home? Is it going to be sustainable? Are we putting and matching people with appropriate housing? Those are successful outcomes and interventions I think that we should track as a community, because it shows us what we are doing and if we need to pivot into another direction. We all think we do things right, and that's always our problem in division, is you do it right and you do it right, and really we all do it right, but is it appropriate for the person that we're serving? So how do we match a person experiencing homelessness and the barriers that they have with appropriate housing, and appropriate housing at that time? I think those are the things that lead us to successes. Is this person getting the help they need? And the question I have is, how can I preserve my humanity and personal safety when approached by homeless persons? Why has feeling unsafe in my community become normal? Whoever wrote this, I am so sorry that you feel unsafe in your community, but it is a big problem for a lot of people. And most of it is because we don't have an understanding of people experiencing homelessness. We don't have an empathy or a compassion for their situation being different than ours. And I don't know how to preserve personal safety. But as far as humanity, I think there's not necessarily you have to interact with someone experiencing homelessness if you don't feel safe in doing so, but just an acknowledgement that they're there, make eye contact with them. One of the things that people complain about to me about being downtown and being homeless is that people will literally cross the other side of the street to not have to cross over where they are. And if we could change that narrative, what I spoke about in the beginning, we could start to change how people feel towards each other and the empathy for the situation in which they're in.
Thank you, Julie. So I wanted to bring up Robert Littman. He is one of the co-chairs of the COC board and on the CHHS board. He also works for Providence. He could, say whatever you want about yourself otherwise. But I wanted him to address one of the questions we got, which is, how is this regional effort not duplicating what the COC board already does?
Before you answer that, I've been asked to ask people not to speak in front of the speakers because that's what causes the fuzz. So. Huh?
It's these right here, right?
The big speakers right above there. So just avoid talking too closely in front of. Yeah, you should speak it there.
Okay. I was going to say, those are some pretty fancy hidden speakers right here. Okay, so question. How is this idea different than what's already in existence? Is that right? Well, I think when I think of putting this idea into action, right, during this 90-day due diligence process, considering what is already in existence is that we have what's called a continuum of care board. And this is a regional board that is independent from jurisdictional influence. Jurisdictional, if that's a word I just used. But it's independent in a sense that we as a Continuum of Care board get to decide how funds are allocated, specifically from HUD, right, those federal dollars, on how money is allocated into the community of our region. So we have representative from the city. The Department of Commerce is in relationship with our 5-year plan to end homelessness that's required by HUD. And so it's already something that's in motion as far as when we talk about a united entity and creating this culture of working together. So that's already in existence. So one of the steps that we have taken as a Continuum of Care board is that we developed a work group to have these regional conversations, right? To help be advocates of this, keeping this momentum about consolidating all these different resources, because again, we remain independent from jurisdictional influence on how those HUD dollars are dispersed into the community. So I know that's a big narrative of keeping politics out of how they can manipulate, you know, certain aspects and how funds are used in the community. That's already in existence within the Continuum of Care board. So we created a work group to help foster this conversation moving forward. So what does that look like? How do we align what's already in existence? We have a collaborative applicant, which is the CHHS, which is still, we as the COC is a governing body, which still remains independent from that jurisdictional influence. So again, this is already in existence. I don't know how many times I could repeat that, but how can we take then this idea of allocating resources under one bucket to create actionable change? And I believe that is a branch, and this is just my personal perspective, that this is a built-off system from the Continuum of Care of resources, because we're not closed to taking in additional resources outside of HUD. That's how you remain jurisdictional independence from having that influence on how funds are dispersed. Now, what this board consists of is 25 different members within our community, stakeholders of different organizations that, yes, some are receiving funds, and we do have certain policies and a governance structure already in place. And we have a great team. So that's just kind of what's already in existence with the Continuum of Care board in maintaining independence from jurisdictional influence and how money is allocated out to our community service providers who are working the front lines.
Sorry, one other housekeeping note. We found a key. It appears to be a house key. We found it on the ground. It's silver. So you might want to check your pockets and see if you're missing a house key.
And then if you're missing a house key, talk to Shane.
Or Bataya.
Okay, so I did want to acknowledge that we have a lot of elected officials in the room. I see Council President Beggs and Councilman Bingle, and I don't know if Councilwoman Kinnear is still here. I did see her earlier, and Councilwoman Wilkerson. And I'm sure I'm missing other elected officials that might be in here because I don't. Who else? Oh, and then Michael Cathcart, of course, Councilman Cathcart. And so I'm not going to try to put them on the spot, but I kind of am. But I'm also going to acknowledge the fact that, well, because this question says, can any city leader? And I do want to acknowledge that city leader is not just elected official. We have a lot of different kinds of city leaders, and I believe in that firmly. And we did have one city leader who was willing to answer this question. Any other elected official is more than willing to steal it away from him. But let me read the question first, and then you guys can fight over it. Can any city leader speak to how criminalizing homelessness has helped solve the crisis? Any takers from elected officials? I didn't think so. Oh, Council President? Okay, all right. I was going to have Commissioner Peace answer it. You could respond afterward. Can you actually come up here? City Cable 5 needs that for sound purposes.
No, but it's a good.
Hi everyone, it's great to see you all here and the interest. I think sometimes we're working super hard on these issues and it's a lonely task, and so it really bolsters my spirits just to see everyone here, no matter what you think and what you believe. The fact that you're here is a big thing. So you could tell by the way the question is written what the answer is. But I just wanted to kind of step back, because I have another question too, of asking about the Martin v. Boise decision and sit and lie and some things like that. And since I'm the one council member that has a law degree, I'm going to try to give a little background of what my lawyer brain says about it. I'm not the lawyer for the city, and frankly, if we had 2 lawyers on the city council, you could hear 2 different opinions. So the thing about criminalization is our criminal justice system has a very different way of looking at the world than solving social problems. It's a very narrow, it's very old. And one of the things about the criminal system is the question on the criminal system is not what's legal or illegal. The question is, can we put you in jail for it? So there are violations of law that are not jailable, there's just fines, and that's a civil fine and that's an infraction in the city. But the question is, can we put you in handcuffs and put you in jail for something that you're doing? And that's different in every community, what the community agreements are around behavior. But typically, the core things are if you hurt somebody, if you steal their property, things like that. Those are the things that most of us agree on. But beyond that, sometimes there's a disagreement. But if a community decides on something, what the courts are going to look at is there an intentional act where they actually know what the rule is and they intentionally violate it. And that is where Boise v. Martin comes down, because Boise v. Martin was a situation in Boise where they were arresting people essentially for sleeping in parks when there were no shelter available for them, and the people being arrested didn't have the money to go to a hotel or have a house. And so what the court said, in a very kind of wonky legal system, and really devoid of values of caring for people or anything like that, they simply said, well, there was no way they could intentionally break that law because they were poor and they were homeless and they were sleeping and everybody has to sleep. And so that was the rule in Boise. But like so many court decisions, that applies in one situation, but how does it apply someplace else? And so one of the questions, so the first thing about Boise v. Martin is that it only applies for public areas. So if somebody who is homeless and there are no shelter beds is sleeping in the front yard or backyard of somebody's private residence, they can be arrested and taken to jail. That's trespassing because it's private property. So Boise is just for public properties. And even then, although it wasn't really answered in Boise directly, but there's a footnote, I think footnote 10 is the famous footnote. And that says, well, that doesn't mean that there's not some places you can keep people from camping. And my example is on the street, Spokane Falls Boulevard. If someone pitches their tent on a dark, cold night in the winter when there are no shelter beds, the police can remove them because that's super dangerous to be sleeping in the middle of a road like that. So I don't think there's any debate on that. But where you hear the debates is, well, what about under the viaduct? Is that it? What about in a park? What about on a sidewalk next door to a homeless shelter? Those are the issues that are out there, and no court has answered that yet. And the challenge when you're a legislative body and trying to figure it out is you're trying to figure out, well, what's the court going to do? What's the risk? What are the impacts there? So we don't know the answer. So we don't know the answer on some of those things. We've decided as a city that, okay, if it's a viaduct in a high traffic area, okay, perhaps we could put someone in jail for that. If it's in a park, perhaps we could, not parkland, but a park, different distinction. And if it's within, I forget how many feet of a homeless shelter, we could do that, because one of the things we've heard from our homeless shelter providers is that there's a whole secondary culture that preys on people in homeless shelters, and they set up their operations of trafficking and drug dealing just near shelters, and so therefore we could do that. And so that's what we've done that. But beyond that, we don't have an agreement from our city legal department, and wondering, and one thing I tell all my clients who I've represented is if you're paying your lawyers, you do not want to be the case that goes to the Supreme Court, because you're going to be paying for that, and you don't know how it's going to turn out. And one little trivia, we all, not all, but most of us have heard about the Blake decision That was a Spokane County case, and they prosecuted someone with some drugs in their jeans pocket, and the defense was, hey, I didn't know it, I was borrowing those jeans. And so I would have hoped that our prosecutor would have said, you know what? I'm not going to take that to the state Supreme Court case, because that overturned, whether you like Blake or not, that overturned 50 years of law on that, and it could have just been dismissed and wait for a different case on that. But you don't kind of want to be that city that spends the money and then somehow is in the gun sights of the judges at the Supreme Court on that. The big question in Boise that is not answered is this. Imagine the situation, which is similar to Spokane, where you have some beds at a shelter. Let's say on a busy night in the deep cold winter, you have 10 beds, but you have 1,000 people homeless camping in the public right-of-way. Can you arrest any one individual, or do you have to show that you have 1,000 beds for all of them? That question has not been answered by any court. We don't know the answer to that question. So that's there. And one of the reasons I just point out these things is no matter what people think about Boise or some of the other cases, they want certainty. They want to be able to say, hey, this is the law, this black and white, and the law is so rarely black and white. And so that's just something to know about. The other issue is on this card has to do with sit and lie. It was like, well, what about sit and lie? What about, doesn't Boise negate that? And the answer is yes, maybe, no, maybe. So at night, Boise would apply. If someone's sleeping on a sidewalk on Boise, for the most part, then they shouldn't be arrested on that. But during the day, there's a Court of Appeals case from the state of Washington under state law that says, you know, if you're choosing to sit on the sidewalk rather than stand on the sidewalk, you're intentionally violating the law, and you can do that. That's a pretty old case. It's about 20, 25 years. It's before Boise, and we don't know. And there are certain arguments out there. Are you standing in a way that's blocking, or are you sitting in a way that's blocking? Does someone have to step over you, or can they get around you? So there are arguments about that. It's not super clear cut. And if anything, that's what I want people to know. My own personal view on all of those is you want to enforce accountability for behaviors that people can control, and especially those behaviors that are actually injuring people, as opposed to a worry. I think a lot of times when I talk with our police officers, they say, well, that person's not going to commit a crime while I'm on the block, but I'm going to go around the corner and then they're going to commit a crime. And it's kind of preventative arrest. And that really doesn't go against our system, but the challenge, our legal system as it's established. But for people who are afraid to walk down the street and to walk past a group of people, that is real. So you can say, oh, constitutional law says you can't do that, but it does not solve the problem for our community. And so I guess I would encourage you, which is not good for the careers of lawyers who do these kinds of things, but work for a solution that's outside the legal system that will really solve it. And I know almost all of you here in this room are doing that. So that is my chat for today. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. I also wanted to give Commissioner Peace an opportunity to answer this question. This is the chair of the Spokane Human Rights Commission. And then we'll move on to the next question here in a second.
So, good evening all. My name is Anwar Peace. I am the chair of the City of Spokane Human Rights Commission. So that was a wonderful explanation of legalese from the council president. I'm going to come at this a little differently as a human rights commissioner. So whether or not criminalizing homelessness has been effective, well, obviously not. And the actual aspect of the real world consequences of criminalizing homelessness is actually made our community less safe. Think about this. These folks that get swept up in these street sweeps by our police department are dealing with traumatic situations that have placed them in the middle of our environment, in this cold environment sometimes. And by having these street sweeps take place from officers that are not trained on using empathy, they're not trained like Hallie or Julie has been on trying to effectively reach a person. All these police officers are trained to do is hurry up, move along. So what it does, it builds a resentment in this population towards law enforcement. And that is so devastatingly harmful to our community, because these are the exact folks that get preyed upon by criminal elements. And they need police services to be able to be safe and whole. And having these street sweeps erodes that trust in this community and is harmful. In fact, there's a situation where just tonight, Range Media dropped a story about the Trent shelter. And part of that story, it talked about the rape victim there, the sexual assault victim there. And the fact that there are those assaults taking place at a shelter where there's lights on and whatnot, just imagine what it's like to be in an encampment someplace and something happened, and you have to now make a decision on whether or not do you call the police because somebody's harmed you, knowing that once the police come, now your whole life is uprooted. And the police are not even gonna actually go after the criminal. They're gonna spend their time rousing you out wherever you're at. And so I say, these street sweeps need to stop, and to any city leader that's here, please employ this police department to stop these street sweeps.
Thank you, Commissioner Pease. So I had another question about preventative measures on homelessness and what that looks like and when it's been successful and how we can focus on that. So I was gonna bring up Joe from Family Promise, because they do have that is a big part of what they do, and I don't wanna answer your question for you. So what are some great preventative measures for homelessness, and what success have you guys had with that?
Sure, so one of the things that you wanna do to solve homelessness is prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place. That's one of the most effective, most cost-effective. Prevention is always cheaper than intervention, always. Doesn't matter what you're talking about, healthcare or any other system, homelessness is that same way. The issue is, how do you get to those folks earlier, further upstream, and how do you solve this problem? So at Family Promise, what we've been doing, we work with families with children. That is our focus, families with children that are also experiencing homelessness. And 6 years ago, we were the first provider to start doing rental assistance. So we started reaching out, doing rental assistance, connecting with the school district to identify families that are at risk earlier, kids that are at risk and experiencing homelessness, and starting to get further and further upstream from these issues. And there's a lot more data now coming out of COVID because we know who applied for rental assistance over the past 2 years across our entire county. The work that needs to be done now is collaborating all of that data mapping it, and then really targeting resources for those communities. And so from our rental assistance, we saw some surprises with who was applying for rental assistance. There were some areas that you totally expect, Hilliard and Liberty Park, and you're expecting those areas to apply for rental assistance. The surprise came on the South Hill. The apartment complexes around Target and up off of 57th, which no service provider is aiming at any of those areas currently. But if you go up, when we started seeing that, you go up and you drive around Shopco parking lot that's closed down up there, you find homeless families sleeping in cars in that parking lot on the South Hill, which is not the traditional area where you would think about it. And so really using the data that we now have to target where are we going to spend resources moving forward needs to be part of this conversation and part of the solution to further get upstream, because if you can slow the flow into homelessness, then it gives everybody on the back end of homelessness and then the shelters time to start to catch up on this. But if it's, if you got one bucket and there's 2 gallons of water coming into that bucket and you only have a 1 gallon spout coming out, it doesn't matter how many buckets you have, you will never have enough. So we're never going to have enough shelters, we're never going to have enough space for homeless if we don't slow the flow in and increase the flow out into permanent housing. And so prevention is just one way to do that.
Thank you, Joe. All right, I'm gonna make my way up here. I got small, short legs. Okay, so we are getting some questions that we don't have the answer to. So I just want to reiterate that part of this new 90-day due diligence process is to suss a lot of this out. And that doesn't mean we're not going to have an answer for those questions, right? It just means we don't have it yet. And so if you didn't get your question answered today, again, they'll be online and we're going to try to respond to all of these. And you can continue to send your questions and feedback to the SpokaneUnite.org website. There's a section for that. And we want to keep this conversation going, past what we're able to even discuss here today. One of the questions that was asked is how are we going to manage conflict of interest with whatever governing board ends up being in place? And I think that's a really great question because the CHHS board, for example, doesn't allow people who may have, a contract or something like that onto their board, right? The COC board does, but there's this tension between when do we make sure that we have the experts who are doing the work at the table as part of the planning and implementation process, and when do we try to remove them to keep it fair and conflict of interest free? I don't have a great answer to that question, but it is one that we're absolutely gonna have to answer, right? Another question that we got was how in Houston and elsewhere have they motivated service providers to work together? And so I'm gonna answer this question kind of backwards, which is that right now, the way that we're built, there's, again, like I said earlier, there's not a lot of incentive for service providers to work together. And one of the ways that the Houston model actually did was through, some tough love. But in a lot of that, what you saw, and I remember when we went to Houston, there was this great moment where one of the ladies said, well, you know what? We were all burnt out because sometimes people who go into being a service provider, they want to change the world and they just do it the way that they can, and they get burnt out because they can't do it all, but they're willing to try, right? They'll try to do it all even though they can't. And so, the way our system is built is a service provider might want to add services, to their bid for a contract because it makes them more competitive, but they might not do that service very well. And so a lot of these tough questions that happened between service providers as Houston moved to this more regional effort was this negotiation of like, you know what, you do this really well, I'm not gonna do this anymore, you do that, right? And I think that's going to be a tough conversation for everybody to have, but I think in the long run, it's going to prevent a lot of burnout from service providers. It's going to make the whole entire ecosystem better and healthier for service providers and for the people, the vulnerable populations that they're serving. And I also welcome more conversations about that, and especially about how do we make sure that service providers can work together and get the resources that they need and facilitate those kinds of conversations to see how they can fit together like puzzle pieces in this sort of response system. So that's not a full answer to it, but I think it's a mode of inquiry that definitely needs to be addressed. All right, Gavin, are you gonna respond to this or a different question? I don't know.
Well, I'll add to the governance question, and Nicolette did a great job of that. We don't have the answers, and we're not supposed to have the answers right now. We're in this due diligence period. We do have somebody looking at governance across the country at different organizations, what's working, what's not. The Seattle Collaborative doesn't allow any conflict with the providers, but as Nicolette said, that excludes a big subject matter expert group. So, how do you bring that in? And they have a separate board for that funnels into the higher board, and then some of them exclude, the electeds. I can guarantee the electeds here aren't going to simply offload their legislative and elected responsibility. So how do we create that, particular, structure also? And so we've got a lot of examples, PDAs, the U District, et cetera, here in Spokane. Some work really well, some less well, but we're gonna go ahead and do research in Houston and Atlanta and Seattle and other cities across the country and ask them, what is it that works about your governance, what doesn't? And then the electeds are going to have to look at that and decide what they want to do. And ultimately, that's what a lot of this comes down to. So one other was, is the voice of our ER doctors involved in the 90-day info gathering period? Hospital system is very crowded and involved in our homeless. Yes. medical community, we have another group that a number of medical professionals are working together and going out and talking to Multicare and Providence and Chaz and all the different medical organizations, mental health and medical providers to say, how can we weave this together more effectively within the homeless response system? So again, it's taking a very broad view of the whole system. So that circle that I showed earlier, health, is going to have a lot of people feeding into that to say, how can we do that efficiently and effectively so that everybody is involved in that process? For anybody that's been to an ER room recently, you know the experience, and it's a remarkably, it's devastating. We had an earlier meeting today where we were commenting that the fire department has about 5 or 6% of their responses are to fires. And then the vast majority have to do with the homelessness response system. Public safety estimates over 50%. So when you add all those services in, and what's our motivation to fix it? Providing housing and services to people experiencing homelessness, the estimate is it's around $20,000 to $30,000. The cost of having them on the streets is closer to $70,000 to $90,000. And that's a remarkable statistic. But when you think about half the police budget or half or more of the fire department budget, when you talk about the impact on the medical system, and you go right down the line and you realize how this is costing the community. Katie talked about the impacts on businesses, our downtown commerce. It's a long list. And so we've got a lot of financial motivation. And when you address a lot of these issues with housing and services, you're not even using local dollars quite often. A lot of those funding sources are federal and not just HUD. HUD is actually a relatively small amount of the funding that we're talking about in the homelessness response system. It's an important part, a really important part, but it's a small part. And you're not going to have an effective homelessness response system until you weave it all together. Holly Birchnell talked about addiction. That's a whole nother area that has to be weaved into it. If you don't bring them all together, it's not going to work. But yes, the hospital and medical system is a big part of our focus right now.
Appreciate this. So we may not be able to answer this question, but just because I don't know if there's somebody who's an expert on this in the audience, I'm going to ask it, and if there isn't, then we'll get an answer to it. But if there is, I do want to give them an opportunity to respond. So this question says, are there plans in place to help older people leaving the workforce from becoming homeless? Living paycheck to paycheck doesn't leave extra to have any real retirement in place. Do we have anybody who is an expert in that field that might be able to talk about that or tell us what that could look like? Doesn't look like it, but I will answer or I'll try to get an answer to this question because I think it's really good. And I do see, Dave, coming up. And while Dave's walking up here, I do want to mention too, because some folks from the tenants union have mentioned a few times that when folks are on a fixed income and the rent goes up, it makes it really difficult for them. And so when they don't really have a retirement in place and they are leaving the workforce, that becomes a challenge. And like Joe had said earlier, one of the ways that we prevent people from being or one of the ways to address homelessness is to prevent people from being homeless in the first place. And Dave, did you want to go ahead and take that?
Yes. I recently got on Social Security about 2 years ago. And my pension kicked in about a year ago. So now I'm making a whopping $1,100 a month, and they just took $230 worth of food stamps away from me. I'm putting out, instead of 152, I'm putting out 167 for my rent. And so it's just getting tighter and tighter and tighter. I just got a raise from Social Security and it just got wiped out. I'm actually paying more for things now. Now I have to spend money on food, which I've never had to do in 20 years, because I've always had food stamps. And it's really putting a crimp on things to the point where I'm thinking about going out and looking for a part-time job. I've been an activist for the homeless for 20 years. and I'm finally making a little bit of money, and now they're chipping away at it, chipping away at it, chipping away at it. I only get a raise once a year on my Social Security, and I don't get a raise with my pension. That's stuck in place. And so I'm not going to be getting extra help because, oh, he's making money. He doesn't need any help now. Ha! If I get kicked out of where I'm at, I have the BASH program because I'm a veteran. I could probably get in another one, except for one problem. There's no place to move to. If somebody gets evicted right now, they're homeless. That's the problem. Almost every homelessness person, everybody who's experienced it, why are they homeless? Because they were evicted. 98% of them were evicted. The others were victims of domestic violence, and they got evicted because of the violence. The victim got evicted. I've heard that so many times over the years. So what we need to do here is build more boxes for people so people can get inside and quit bugging people who get onto housing and they expect us to live alone and be lonely. And that's what I'm experiencing. I rarely have somebody come over anymore. I spend so much time by myself, I'm starting to go a little cuckoo. So that's part of the problem of aging. I've recently come into need for a cardiologist. I've had to slow down a little bit. Because the vein, or I should say the artery feeding my heart is only running at 85%. So I have to slow down. And so you know what? I'm going to yell a little louder now.
Okay, party at Dave's afterward. That's where the after party is. Very So thank you, Dave. I think it's a good time too to switch over to another question since we're talking about some tenant issues. There was a question about how landlords can help and be helped to be a part of the solution to the various problems that we're facing with homelessness. Steve, would you want to answer that question? And maybe Dane, you could talk about your housing navigator stuff, or Daniel, if you want afterward. Okay, yeah, let's just move this chair so you can get here. Not to put you on the spot, but.
I think one of the areas that landlords have attempted to do is to seek help dealing with challenged tenants. I started working with a coalition of social agencies about 3 years ago, and when our landlords were dealing with challenges from veterans, we would work with Goodwill. When we were dealing with youth challenges, tenants under 30, and whether it were family issues like that, working with Volunteers of America, working with the YWCA, YMCA on abuse issues. And because most of our landlords are not social workers. And so when they run up with these challenges, in order to have some compassion and to deal with it. I've got a tenant, a woman 32, that has 2 young children, and she has melanoma cancer. And if it wasn't working with the Y, with the Cancer Society, helping to keep her in the home. And one of the things that I've tried to do in my role with the Landlord Association is to keep people in homes. And I'm devastated that the legislature did not pass any rental assistance. Someone is evicted, they not only cannot find a place that they can afford, but they go into a system, and whether it's shelter or whatever, we're talking at a cost of $5,000 to $7,000, and if they're institutionalized, $9,000 to $15,000 a month. For $1,500, I can keep 4,000 people in their homes. And I can keep landlords committed to supplying low-income housing. And you know, when you really try to deal with the realistic numbers, there are almost 50,000 renters, units, and 95% of them pay their rent. The challenges are less than 4,000 critical issues: drugs, alcohol, mental illness. I'm not talking about the homeless. They're out of our housing system. We've got probably about another 9,000 to 15,000 of those units that are dealing with issues of poverty and affordability. And it's not just rent. It's transportation, it's food, and all the other issues. And it's poverty. And I'm watching public officials, and I was a part of the group, to come up with centers and corridors, the things that would basically enable more affordable housing in areas that are accessible. And I watched 5 administrations do nothing to implement that policy. Councils can pass policies, but the administrations have to carry them out. And that accountability of really putting the dollars to best proper use is probably the biggest challenge we face. I deal with an association of 800 landlords, and I can tell you that 750 of those people work with tenants, went through COVID, or doing like I'm doing with this family that has cancer, or the family that's up at 18 working with navigators, 5 families. Basically came into a house on the South Hill, and they didn't know how to live there. They didn't understand the responsibilities of maintaining that home. After 30 days of living there, they didn't take the clothes out of their bags and put them on shelves. They didn't put food into the shelves. They didn't know how to live in that house. And as a landlord, I'm sitting there saying, I'm not a social worker. Now, I probably, because of my political experience, have more association. But those alliances, and I've watched our landlord association with goodwill and find, what, 120 houses over 3 or 4 years to help people happen? That's the type of thing that makes us a part of the solution. And my final point is this. We're attacking symptoms. The cure to the problem is dealing with poverty and building more houses. If you don't do that, you're not going to solve the problem. 35, 50,000 homes, if we don't plus 3,000 a year, we'll never solve the problem. The reality, it's going to take 15 years to make a dent. And that's a political reality and an economic reality. And if we had all the money in the world, we couldn't build them fast enough. We don't have the materials and the builders. That's an observation. But chipping away at it is the type of thing that makes me sleep nice. And people say, you know, Corker, you're 82. Why in the hell do you care? My daughter, my grandchildren are here. That's why I care. And chipping away of that is happening. I'm watching what Ryan is doing with this study. I can't wait to come up with the solutions and have them integrated into this activity. There's a hell of a lot of information that came out of that. I was just in the housing and health. And we're going to find the solutions. You know, I get disappointed many times, but I've never been discouraged. And you talk about leadership. I've been spending the last 6 months on a crazy project, recognizing the 50th anniversary of Expo. And I've been reading about King Cole and what that man did, the leadership. You talk about finding somebody to deal with the housing crisis, we need another King Cole. He built this World's Fair. The voters said no. He went out and got the business community to underwrite the obligation. And it changed downtown forever. So don't tell me it can't be done. And don't tell me you can't be a part of the solution at 82. Because we made enough of mistakes that we can help you prevent from making.
Thank you. That's a really good point too about King Cole, because we've done it before and we can do it again, and I really admire that. We're running a little bit low on time, but I did want to give Daniel from Housing Navigator an opportunity to quickly say what they've been doing, and then Terry, I didn't know if you had a comment right at the end. And part of this too, I just want to thank everybody who came out for the 4-hour town hall we had when landlords and tenants all came together to discuss all of those issues. I think, to me, we had a lot of really difficult conversations, and everybody, you know, by and large was pretty civil. And I think that more of that going forward is going to be what we need. And so, Danny, yeah, do you want to just talk a little bit about what you're doing, and then we'll kick it over to Terry, and then we'll wrap it up.
All right, cool.
Okay, so hi, my name is Daniel Clemmy. I'm the CEO of Housing Navigator. We just got a contract with the City of Spokane to assist with finding housing for people at Camp Hope. And as far as the private market, like what can it do to assist? Because there's a huge ecosystem here, right, of people that provide housing. There's nonprofit providers, there's developers, there's everybody in between, right? So what can the private market do? Well, one, they have housing now. Okay, we're not talking about building housing in 10 years. We're talking landlords currently have available units. And there's people sleeping outside right now. So how do we get them in? Well, we pay a lot more. It's risk mitigation. That's just one thing that you can do. It's called the Landlord Incentive Fund. It's a best practice. HUD has an amazing magazine. It's called Evidence Matters. It's great. If you're an evidence-based, you're looking for data-informed decisions, Evidence Matters is a wonderful magazine. In the winter of 2019, they had a great article on all the communities that have used these incentive funds to house people. And so that's what we made. And we pay by far the most, but it's to solve an emergency. It's not necessarily sustainable for 100% of the population. But we need to get people housed now. I have a personal belief that God loves everybody. That's my belief. He loves the people sleeping outside. So what we did as a partnership, working with Steve Corker, working with the Landlord Association, let's call it making a strategic partnership, creating a relationship to overcome barriers, right? Because people need help, even people with high barriers. But once you get them housed, we have a really sexy amount of money that we can pay. It's the most. It's the most in any program in the nation. We just got that contract, so we're really excited to get started. But you also need support. You need service providers. Because the goal isn't to just give landlords money, the goal is to solve homelessness. Right? Giving people, fulfilling their dreams. We want them to have good lives. The thing is, the rental market's very, very tight. And you're in a competition with every other person trying to find housing if you're homeless. We're talking people in the Air Force Base, people that are moving here. There's a lot of people moving to Spokane. I just saw Range Media talk to Jay Inslee. A lot of people are moving to Washington. You're in a competition with them. So one way you can level the playing field is by paying more. It's risk mitigation. That's just one thing we can do. I think strategic partnerships and communication, being very realistic, right, about what's going on in these people's lives. And then specificity. The Department of Commerce said the Housing Navigator wrote the best scope of work in the row proposal. The reason why is it's very limited. We're not going to be everything to everyone. We're going to do one thing the best, and that's getting private market units open for people with high barriers to find permanent housing.
Awesome. Okay, so I got time for one last comment, and I'm going to give it to Terry from the Tenants Union. And I just wanted to touch on the fact that one of the things that Houston did that was really successful was to build a lot of relationships with landlords so that we could see when the units were vacant and to do a lot of what basically Daniel and Dane are going to be doing with Housing Navigators. And then Terry from the Tenants Union, do you want to speak?
Hi. I am going to talk about the elephant in the room that nobody has talked about. The number one cause of homelessness, you can go to any national housing organization, every state, every city, whether it's Seattle, Los Angeles, California, Washington, nationally, the number one cause of homelessness is the rising cost of rent. And that has not been talked about. There were 2 bills before the state legislature this year that would have stabilized rent. Unfortunately, this was the first year they were introduced. One of them would have put a cap on rent increases, and another would have assigned enforcement to the Attorney General for rent gouging. We see rent gouging in Spokane everywhere. We talk to tenants in Spokane. One building where every tenant in the building, half of the tenants in the building are using housing choice vouchers. Those tenants, every tenant got a $400 rent increase. They can't afford it. That's an eviction notice. There are things that can be done that will prevent homelessness that have to do with protecting tenants so that we can keep renters in the homes that they're already living in. and not become homeless. Now, it's true, there's a preemption in the state law that prohibits cities and counties from establishing any kind of rent control or establishing caps on rent. But one thing that we can do, and one thing that cities all across Washington are doing, is extending the notice period for rent increases. 60 days is not enough time when you have a $400 rent increase. We could extend that to 6 months. That was one of the bills that was before the legislature. That could be done by the city and the county. There's also a bill before the legislature that will create, a real estate excise tax. That will create a pot of money up to $280 million for the state of Washington for affordable housing. This BOCA that everybody's talking about that is incentivizing private development, that's incentivizing private development. That is not incentivizing any publicly funded affordable housing. What BOCA actually will do, because there are no anti-displacement or anti-gentrification policies to go along with BOCA, it means that somebody can tear down a single family home where there's a renter inside of it, and they can tear that house down, displace those families, and create 4 houses in their place, making it very much more profitable for the owner, developer, and the landlord. But it will cause more homelessness. So, and also that real estate excise tax, if that bill passes, it would allow the city and the county to also establish that real estate excise tax so that we can have affordable housing. We have to address the cost of housing and the reasons why people are becoming homeless. They can't afford to rent any longer. And we can enact policies that will cushion that blow, extend that period of time. We can enact rental relocation, so when tenants are displaced from BOCA, that there's some money that can provide them to relocate. There's a lot of things that we can do that just are not being addressed at all by this conversation. And so I would like to make sure that we include tenant protections, affordable housing, and extending notice periods for rent increases, and eliminating no-cause evictions. The state of Washington enacted a just cause eviction ordinance that supposedly gets rid of all no-cause evictions, but they put in an amendment when that bill was passed, and it does not protect tenants who have a fixed-term lease. So tenants who have a fixed-term lease, they can get a 60-day notice at the end of their lease for no reason whatsoever. They've paid rent, they've broken no rule, and they will be evicted. Those are the kinds of things that we need to plug those gaps to keep people housed. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. I do want to acknowledge too that some of the things that Terry talked about with the anti-displacement and some of those conversations we're continuing to have. The Housing Action Subcommittee will be having those conversations, and those are exactly the kinds of topics that I hope that she's able to do like a new breakout stakeholder engagement on her own. I want to thank everybody tonight. Obviously, we have a lot of passionate experts and people with so much experience and all kinds of different, arenas, and everybody was nice to each other, and I almost didn't expect that. And I really appreciate you guys all coming out. Again, you should go to SpokaneUnite.org if you want to give more feedback and to see more information about what other community conversations look like. And I work for the city. My email address is nockletry@SpokaneCity.org. If you have stuff that you're concerned about with housing and homelessness, bring it on. I'm willing to listen to you guys, and I'm willing to have a conversation, even the tough ones. Thank you for coming out tonight.